You're listening to Gateway 97.8. In the past few years, I think it's fair to say that politics has left us becoming more divided, more disagreements and a lot less listening. It's left us asking the question, why can't we all just get along? My next guest is a broadcaster and author who tries to answer this question in his new book. I'm delighted to welcome Iain Dale to the show. Iain, hi, thanks for coming on. So what's the answer? Why can't we all just get along? Good afternoon.
Hi. There are all sorts of different reasons. I think one of them is that we've become much more polarized in society. That I think the internet has played a big role in this, and indeed, in some ways, the mainstream media too, where people actually just want to talk to people that agree with them, and they don't respect that people can have a different point of view. They don't try to understand somebody else's point of view. We saw this in the Brexit referendum, where if you were an ultra Remainer, you weren't interested in the arguments that the Brexiteers were putting forward. You were so certain that you were right. And I voted Leave, but I completely understand that there was a different argument. I just didn't happen to agree with it. But I had to understand the argument in order to make my own arguments against it. And I think that's where people need to really look themselves in the mirror and think, well, if I just listen on the radio or watch television on programs that I just agree with, how is that actually helping me develop my arguments? And I get this on LBC where people say, well, I listen to you, Iain, but I don't listen to James O'Brien. And you think, well, you should actually, and his listeners should listen to me. And you actually get, if you get an all-rounded view of a subject, you're more likely to be able to A, understand it, and B, form a view, and then put that view forward to other people.
It's interesting because Boris Johnson is often mocked for writing two letters when he decided how he was going to vote in the Brexit referendum, one for Remain, one for Leave. And of course, he came out for Leave in the end. But from what you're saying there, you think that's sort of sensible method to make up your mind?
Well, it is in a way. He got ridiculed for doing that, but I kind of understood why he did it. I mean, very few people are dogmatists when they start looking at a subject. I think, I mean, I didn't decide to vote Leave until early in 2016 when David Cameron didn't get a renegotiation from Brussels. I didn't come into that as somebody who had been campaigning for decades to leave the EU, and nor did Boris Johnson. So I think it is wise to challenge your own views by reading things that you know you're going to disagree with or think you'll disagree with. And I get that on my LBC show all the time, where I start off with one view, and sometimes by the end of the hour, my listeners have persuaded me, actually, I hadn't thought of that. And so you can change your view. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen.
And those LBC phone-ins you do are sort of based around people calling in, telling you their thoughts, often based on disagreement. So you should know then how to disagree effectively. How do we do it?
Well, by not shouting. I mean, the subtitle of the book is Shout Less, Listen More. And there is far too much shoutiness in our public discourse. Now, some people say, well, it's always been like that. If you look at the political cartoons of the 18th and 19th centuries, the scenes in the House of Commons were far worse than we ever see nowadays. But I do think that social media has coarsened our public debate, where if somebody, particularly on Twitter, if somebody writes a tweet insulting me, then my natural human reaction is to defend myself and hit back with something that may be even more extreme than what they've said. Now, I found myself getting into completely unnecessary Twitter spats, and you just have to operate a bit of self-discipline, particularly when you're talking to somebody that hasn't got their proper name, that it's just sort of a few letters and then some numbers, and you think, well, they're probably in St. Petersburg, a Russian bot factory. You think, why am I wasting my time arguing with a bot? And so we do all have individual responsibility to behave ourselves, when not just when we're on social media, but in the way we relate to other people too. And I try to encourage that on my show. I'm not a shock jock. I don't go on air intending to have a row with people. I do want people to phone in to disagree with me, because I mean, radio where you just have people phoning in saying, oh, Iain, I think you're marvellous. You're the best presenter on LBC. I wish I could have your babies. I mean, that is boring. But if people ring you and challenge your views, that makes for entertaining radio, we did a phone-in on various aspects of coronavirus last night. Had all sorts of different views, some of them which I could agree with, some of them which I didn't. But even the ones that I disagree with I wasn't going to shout at them. They picked up the phone to phone in. The least you can do is treat people with respect.
Yeah, and it was an enjoyable phone-in to listen to. You mentioned Twitter,
Oh,
and
you
I
do your
find
research, don't you, John?
yeah, I mean, you've got to, haven't you? The block button comes in very handy, and it's one of my favourite buttons on social media. But what do you make of cancel culture at the moment? There's this ongoing sort of discussion about if you disagree with someone, you can no platform them, you can cancel them, not listen to any of their views. Do you think that's effective?
It's a very difficult one because effectively by blocking somebody on Twitter, you're cancelling them. Everybody has their own individual tolerance levels. And I believe in free speech, but you don't have a universal right to free speech. It has to be responsible free speech. But you and I might disagree on where to draw the line on that. For example, the row over Wiley a couple of weeks ago about his anti-Semitic remarks. Now, I thought it was a disgrace that Twitter didn't take action against him or didn't take enough action. And so I joined this 48-hour boycott. Now, in a way, that anyone who did that was saying, well, Wiley should be cancelled from Twitter. Well, yeah, actually, because nobody wants racist anti-Semitic remarks on a social media platform. Now, eventually they did do that, but you have to say that if it had been somebody, a white person saying the same things about a black person, that person would have been cancelled by Twitter immediately. What I don't think you can do is do what is happening in quite a lot of our universities at the moment, where speakers who are vaguely on the right, Amber Rudd, former Home Secretary, she turned up to do a speech at Oxford University and she was then banned. Amber Rudd is the antithesis of being an extremist. She just happens to be a conservative. What a crime. If we can't have free speech for people, for representatives from mainstream political parties, particularly at universities, which ought to be the bastions of free speech, we're on a very, very slippery slope indeed. So I don't like the cancel culture, but that's not to say that there aren't people who, there are people, I have a little list of people I don't want on my show. So I cancel them from my show. But sorry, you're not on it, no. But, well, who are they? Well, Tommy Robinson, for example. Tommy Robinson has never been elected to anything. He's a self-styled, well, I was going to say something quite insulting then, but given the title of the book, I thought I'd better not. He doesn't really represent anybody. He's a very articulate, quite clever individual who manages to rally people to his extremist cause. And I don't want to help him do that. He resorts sometimes to ringing in under an assumed name, and then when he gets on there, he says who he is. Well, I just don't want him on. And there's probably only about 5 or 6 people that I just don't want on because and Jem Chowdhury was another one. I did interview him once when I was a naive, innocent first-time radio presenter, and it was you can still find it on YouTube somewhere. It was about a 12-minute interview. And I held my own in that, but he's one of these people that can argue that black is white quite convincingly. And I just thought, what a dangerous man. Again, he represents no one. I was convinced that he was effectively, if not endorsing terrorists, actually subliminally helping them in some way. And you look at quite a few of the terrorists in this country that have been convicted in recent years, and a lot of them were acolytes of his. So I decided that I wasn't going to have him on my program. And I think that he used to appear regularly on Newsnight. And I just think, why are you having him on? It just fulminates, that's the wrong word. It encourages division, because 99.9% of Muslim people in this country would hold exactly the same view of Jem Chowdhury that I do. But by giving him a platform, you're almost saying that he does represent some sort of mainstream Muslim thought, and he just does not. So it's people like that I just don't. As well as being the presenter of my program, I'm the editor, so I can decide who I want on, and I like to think I do that quite responsibly.
No, we talk about Twitter, and a lot of people complain about Twitter, but also sort of praise it as the bastion for all things news and politics. Most of the population are on Facebook. Why is it that we talk about Twitter so much?
Well, Twitter does have a huge audience, but it doesn't represent Britain. I remember on election day in 2019, I was convinced by 5 o'clock that Jeremy Corbyn was heading for a landslide purely because of what I was reading on Twitter. And we all know what happened then. So you have to be quite careful in how you judge reactions on Twitter. I do a podcast called Iain Dale All Talk, where I interview people in the media and politics for an hour. And I've just done one with the Muslim commentator Yasmin Alabai-Brown, who's a good friend of mine. We disagree on everything, but we just get on. Whenever I mention her name on Twitter, I mean, just look at my Twitter feed right now, and you will see the bile that is sort of posted about her. Now, she is a controversial figure. She has controversial views, but there's no excuse for some of the things that people say and say, well, I'm not going to listen to it. So judging by Twitter, that would be the worst listened to podcast I've ever done. But I bet you it isn't, because normal people, I think, will be quite interested in the discussion that we've had. But I think you can have civilized discussion with people that you disagree with. I do another podcast, For the Many, with Jackie Smith, a former Labour Home Secretary. And we've just won an award for that, for the Political Civility Awards, where we've done 200 episodes. In fact, when I finished talking to you, I'm about to record the 200th episode. We haven't had a row in all of those 200 episodes. Now, she has very strong views. I have very strong views. But we're kind of like two mates down the pub on a Sunday evening chatting about the week's news and all the different things that happen. And you can have a constructive discussion. And we've built up a massive audience in that podcast because people like the fact that we do disagree with each other, but we do it nicely.
And it's not just politics as well, that it often gets you laughing along too, which I suppose makes a former politician and a radio presenter seem very human, and often they're not described as such.
Well, we talk about our lives. I mean, we are human beings. Anybody in the public eye is a human being too. Jackie's just going through a divorce. She's got a new man in her life, so she talks about that a bit. I've talked about what it's been like in lockdown, broadcasting my show every night from my bedroom. The fact that my two dogs want to come in and help me broadcast all the time. And the thing is, and you know this, if you're on particularly the radio is such an intimate medium where people who listen to you every day, they regard you as a friend, and particularly during times of crisis like coronavirus. I've lost count of the number of emails I've had from people who say, you've helped me get through this. You are my friend in the evening, and we've never met. But I mean, they know that I drive an Audi, that I support West Ham, that I've got a Jack Russell and a miniature Schnauzer. And so if I ever meet people in the street, they kind of, I think that without thinking, they always say hello because they think they know me. I've done it myself. I can't remember. It's a really big name celebrity. And I remember walking past them in the street and I said, oh, hello. And I thought, you absolute tool. But and it's really nice when you get these messages from people, because it kind of validates what you do.
And we both know that radio is a great friend. I mean, here at Gateway, we've given out hundreds of free radios to elderly and vulnerable in our society because a lot of people need a friend at this time. We've mentioned lockdown, and we've spoken a bit about Brexit and the tensions surrounding that, and making the country very, very divided. But coronavirus and lockdown has dwarfed all of this, and we're now trying to work together to overcome this virus. So I suppose now is the time to listen to each other and to shout less.
Well, it absolutely is. And I think we have to recognize that a lot of people have found this very difficult. Now, I think if you, excuse me, if you live on your own in a studio flat in London and you haven't been able to go to work, you haven't been able to mix with anybody for several months, I think that is very, very difficult for people, particularly older people maybe, but also younger people who just aren't used to being on their own. Now, I quite like my own company. It doesn't bother me if I go for hours on end being on my own, but I'm lucky I've got my partner at home, I've got my two dogs, and I literally for 4 months didn't go out of the house. But that didn't affect me mentally, I don't think. But we in March, we started doing a mental health hour every Thursday at 9, which we're continuing with, because we identified that there were a lot of people that were finding it incredibly difficult. And I think the great thing now is that people are able to talk about their mental health in a way that maybe 10 years ago they wouldn't have done. And people phone up radio stations and tell you the most intimate things that they've never told their partners, their family, their best friends, but they tell you even though they've never met you, and they know that they're on national radio, which I've always found an interesting phenomenon, but it happens. So I did a 2-hour phone-in on Monday on male rape. Well, I mean, that younger producers, I think, are very nervous about doing things like that, because I think, well, who's going to phone in about that? Nobody's going to phone in and tell you about what's happened to them. Well, we did it for 2 hours, not one, which tells you how many phone calls we were getting.
Yeah, and you mentioned mental health. There was this report out yesterday saying people are more anxious, more depressed at the moment. I don't think we needed a report to tell us that, but it has been a very difficult time, hasn't it? And I found myself, I'm on air every evening doing a coronavirus update, and you're so close to it all, and sometimes it just gets all a bit too much, doesn't it? And you need to take that break. Is it difficult for you to take a break? You're a very busy person.
I I don't really have much time to take breaks, and I never quite know what to do if I do. I just end up watching box sets or something. I don't really ever switch off. I mean, obviously LBC is my main thing, but I do a lot of writing, newspaper columns. I do 4 different podcasts. So I don't really switch off very much at all. I go to Norfolk quite a lot. We have a house up there, and that is the only time when I kind of do switch off a bit, because it's a totally different environment. And I said to someone the other day, I think I'll become a nicer person when I'm up there.
Is that sustainable then? Because, like you say, you're on telly sometimes first thing in the morning, and then you're on the radio in the evening, and then even on a Sunday, you're on LBC. How long can you continue sort of at this pace before you say, right, no, now I need to stop? Or is it really just, keep on keeping on?
Are you saying I should retire? Give you a chance? I do think about that a bit. I'm 58. And you can't go on forever. And there are always younger people who would love to have your slot on the radio. And at some point, we all know that every radio presenter has a shelf life. I've been at LBC for 10 years. I still love it. It's the best job I've ever had. And I want to continue doing it for some time to come. But coronavirus, this lockdown, it does make you reflect on your lifestyle. And I don't enjoy going into London. I don't, because I live in Kent, and I don't take part in sort of the London social scene really at all. And there is part of me that would maybe at some point in the future want to maybe step back a little bit, but whether that means I can't see myself ever stepping back completely, but you never know. At some point, that inevitably it will all come to an end. But I'll make the most of it while I can. Which is probably, I do say no to things a lot, but I probably say yes to most things, because I think one day this will all end.
Exactly, and you're enjoying it so much, and we're enjoying listening to you. So we don't want you to go anywhere. Look, at the end of the book, you outline 50 ways to improve public discourse. I suppose these are tips we all need to take on board.
Yeah, I was very conscious throughout the book that I was outlining what the problems were, but in the text, not really offering much of a solution. So I decided at the end to effectively write 50 bullet points as to ways that we can each individually improve our behavior. And I've split them up into sort of social media, the mainstream media, etc. So some of them are actually blindingly obvious, but when you put them down together, it's actually quite easy to come up with 50. I could have probably gone on and done 100. But I really hope people do get to the end of the book and read that bit, because I think it is important that we all sit down and analyze our own behavior, not just on social media, but in the way we conduct ourselves with other people in our everyday lives. And I do blame the media quite a bit for the fact that things have got to this point. If you take political interviews as an example, the viewer or listener is being shortchanged in those now, because most of them are 3, 4, 5 minutes long. So the politician goes into the interview knowing exactly what he or she is going to say before the interviewer asks a question. The interviewer is looking for a gotcha moment so they can make headlines for themselves and move up the ladder in the media. And in the end, the listener gets absolutely nothing out of it. But the great thing about the internet is that it has brought back the long form interview, particularly in podcasts, where you can talk to someone for an hour. And if you think about it, after 5 or 10 minutes, a politician has used up all of the pre-prepared lines. So after that, they're winging it, and they inevitably then are going to say something more interesting. And I love doing longer form interviews, and I don't really even regard them as interviews. I regard them as conversations. I'm not looking to catch someone out. I mean, if they say something stupid, obviously you're going to challenge them. But the thought that you go into an interview thinking, how can I get a headline for myself? Or how can I get the politician to say something stupid? I mean, it's an awful way to think, but I know that some interviewers do think like that.
And we're seeing more and more of it. I mean, my alarm in the morning is the Today programme on Radio 4, and I'm shouting at the radio before I've even had my first coffee of the day, and I think a lot of people do, and we are being shortchanged there. Iain, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Where can we get your new book?
Well, it's called Why Can't We All Just Get Along? Shout Less, Listen More. It's out Thursday, and you can hopefully get it in bookshops. But of course, bookshops have got a problem. I would urge you, order it from your local independent bookshop, because they're the ones that need your custom at the moment. They're having a really, really tough time. But if you can't, you can get it from Amazon. If you want a signed copy, and I'll happily personally dedicate it, you can get it from my website at politicos.co.uk.
Iain Dale's new book, Why Can't We All Just Get Along, is out tomorrow. You're listening to Gateway 97.8 with me, Johnny Jenkins.